Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the situation in Cuba, relying directly on a really sobering recent statement from United Nations experts. It's a highly complex geopolitical situation, right? But as always, we're going to break it down objectively using just the data and the expert assessments provided in our sources. My goal here is to make sure you walk away with a crystal clear understanding of what is actually happening on the island right now.
Energy starvation. Just let those words sink in for a second. United Nations experts are deeply concerned about the United States' actions here. And they've actually described the current fuel blockade using exactly that phrase, energy starvation. It's an incredibly powerful, specific, and honestly visceral term. 3 independent UN special rapporteurs recently released a joint statement where they intentionally chose these exact words to describe the reality of this fuel shortage. Notice they didn't just call it a crisis or a deficit. They used starvation, a term we usually reserve for a total lack of food, to really hit home how deeply a modern society relies on power just to survive.
So let's start by defining exactly what this crisis is.
Okay, let's dive right into this definition based on the UN experts' assessment. They define energy starvation as a condition where the lack of fuel literally cripples the essential services required for a dignified life. In plain terms, it means Cuba simply does not have enough fuel to keep the country running properly. I want you to really think about what a dignified life entails for us today. We completely take for granted that turning a key is going to start a car or flipping a switch will turn on a light. But when a whole nation experiences energy starvation, we aren't talking about a minor inconvenience or some temporary localized blackout. The experts are describing a systemic, nationwide paralysis. Without fuel, water purification plants can't pump clean water into neighborhoods. Emergency vehicles can't respond to crises. Basically, the very foundation of a functioning, healthy society just gets stripped away.
Now, let's look at the January blockade.
1. That's a staggering number. According to the reporting, while Cuba was already facing some pretty stiff economic headwinds, the situation worsened sharply following a fuel blockade imposed by Washington back in January. And the sheer scale of this bottleneck, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. It is incredibly difficult for Cuba to get fuel right now. To put that into perspective, since January, only one oil ship from Russia has successfully arrived. Just one single ship. Imagine trying to supply an entire national power grid, a whole transportation infrastructure, and an entire population over several months with just that. When a nation of millions is forced to ration the cargo of a solitary tanker, literally every single drop of fuel becomes a critical resource. And the depletion of those reserves is exactly what triggered this emergency the UN is warning the world about. Which brings us to the cascading effects on daily life.
Here is what is actually happening on the ground because of the blockade. Basically, essential services are failing. We're talking about hospitals, schools, and transport. They all need energy to work, right? Without it, people simply cannot live that dignified life we just talked about. Let's look at how interconnected this all is. A hospital cannot run a life-saving ventilator or keep crucial vaccines cold without a reliable power grid. But the crisis goes way beyond the hospital walls. Think about it. If the transportation sector collapses because there's no gas or diesel, doctors and nurses physically cannot get to the hospitals to treat their patients. Students and teachers can't reach their schools. Food can't be moved from farms to city centers. The UN experts are explicitly warning that these public pillars are being pushed to the brink of total failure. It's a domino effect, a cascading collapse of daily civic life.
And because of this major shortage of oil, power cuts are incredibly common. Electricity goes out frequently all across the island. The sources state that supply shortages and power cuts are no longer anomalies. They are the baseline reality. They are the norm. Imagine the deep psychological and physical toll of that kind of unpredictability. How do you plan your day, manage a household, or run a small business when you literally never know if you'll have the electricity needed to cook dinner, light up a workspace, or operate machinery? This constant instability just exhausts the population. It completely halts productivity, leaving citizens in this perpetual state of just waiting for the lights to come back on.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader economic impact.
So the economy is, unsurprisingly, really struggling. The UN notes that Cuba was actually already in the throes of what they classify as economic stagnation. But when you compound that pre-existing vulnerability with a severe fuel blockade, you get a sharply worsened reality that just spirals out of control. A massive part of this is that tourism is way down. Because of the power cuts and shortages, way fewer people are choosing to visit Cuba for their holidays. And what's absolutely crucial to understand here is the vicious cycle this creates. Tourism has historically been a huge economic driver for the island, bringing in vital foreign currency. But without fuel, the resorts can't guarantee power or basic resources, so tourists stop coming. And without those tourists bringing in foreign revenue, the Cuban state is further starved of the capital it absolutely needs to buy what little, highly expensive fuel might be available on the global market. It's a catch-22. The lack of energy destroys the exact industry they need to fund energy purchases.
Finally, we need to address the human rights concerns. The experts are straight up saying this blockade is unlawful. They believe it's wrong because it actively stops the Cuban people from enjoying their basic human rights. That is the direct formal assessment from the United Nations Special Rapporteurs. And as your explainer, I'm objectively reporting their findings here without taking any political side, but we really have to recognize the immense gravity of international human rights experts at the UN using the word unlawful to describe a United States policy. They argue that this policy goes far beyond targeted political pressure and directly attacks the fundamental human protections of an entire civilian population. When a policy intentionally deprives citizens of the baseline resources required for health, education, and development, these experts determine it actively violates international human rights standards.
So it leaves us with this really heavy thought. When geopolitical blockades cripple hospitals and schools, at what point does policy cross the line into denying a dignified life? It's a profound, incredibly difficult tension between international sanctions and basic human rights, a tension directly highlighted by the UN's urgent warning of energy starvation. I want you to just sit with that question for a bit and consider the vast ripple effects these geopolitical maneuvers have on everyday people. Thanks for joining me for this explainer today. Keep questioning,